Inescapably. Inescapably.
Inescapably foreign. Welcome y bienvenidos a Without Borders. If you've tuned into the show before, you know I'm Nolan Yuma and that this is the show for nomads, expats, immigrants, refugees, third culture kids, or anyone else that feels inescapably foreign. Today I'm here with César, or César, the Spanish language coach. And I did a calculation. I spent over 100 hours listening to you over the past 2 years, which is more than anyone else. Well, aside from my family and my partner. I don't know how happy my partner would be if I spent more time listening to you than her. But anyway,
that's
César,
weird.
Obviously, you're one of my favorite podcast hosts and ways to study Spanish. So I'm incredibly excited to have you here. I have a lot to ask you about language and how it relates to society. But first, let's just get into your immigration story. And how are you doing today, man?
Okay. Thank you, Nolan, for having me here. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And you are part of my podcast history as well, because you were, if anyone is interested to listening to you in Spanish, they can all go to my podcast and listen to you. You did really well. And I'm good. I'm excited to have this chat with you about this very interesting topic. We all are, you and I, and the people listening to us are, as you say, immigrants, refugees, expats, digital nomads, third generation. No, how is it?
Third culture kids.
Third culture kids, which is a very interesting topic as well. Yeah,
exactly.
And it's very interesting. My adult life has been based outside of my country, outside of Spain, because I've been living in the UK for 10 years. And when I think that almost my whole adult life has been based here and I still don't feel British, but at the same time I feel Spanish, but at the same time now when I'm in Spain I don't feel Spanish. I feel very disconnected as well. So it's very weird because I feel from nowhere.
I think it's interesting to bring up because a lot of the time when we look at the psychology of third culture kids, they always refer to kids that grew up in three cultures before a certain age. But I think just like you're saying, a lot of these identity issues that people have, it doesn't need to happen as a child. You can have this if you spend your adult life outside of the culture you were raised in as well.
Yeah.
So César, and by the way, listeners, I'm going to say César sometimes. I'm going to say César just because César is how we say it in Spanish. It's how I'm used to hearing it. But of course, César is how César introduces himself in English. What parts of yourself feel very Spanish that have made it difficult to acculturate to London?
I think the Mediterranean personality in general, not only Spain, but also Italy, Greece, we're very close to our families. You know, we don't go to university to a different state or even city. We, like, the other day I was talking to in another podcast and I was telling them how I studied my degree in Valencia. I didn't want to go 200 kilometers away from home because I wanted to study, you know, in the University of Valencia where I come from, and I lived with my parents during this time. That's very common in Mediterranean countries. Spaniards don't leave the nest until they're 31 or 30.
Yeah.
And I think 30 in Spain and 31 in Portugal, which obviously is not only about us being like mommy boys or daddy boys or whatever, or girls, but also because we don't have the money to move out, right? But so we're very close to our families, and I feel in England where I live now, it's slightly different. The Anglo culture in general is slightly different, we are. I think the cliche or the stereotype of Spanish people being emotional and passionate is real, and British people are somehow different.
Yeah, they've actually looked at that with nurses, acute Mediterranean syndrome. That Mediterranean people on average make a lot more noise in the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stereotype, but whenever we're talking about these cultural generalizations, sometimes they perpetuate stereotypes, but I think it's important just to be aware of still. Now, what parts of you are starting to feel British?
I think there has always been a British side in me, even when I was little, because I'm very, like, I like to comply with the rules. I like queuing. I like respecting, all the norms and things like that. So I think that's a very British part of me, and I feel very comfortable in this environment where people respect the rules and pay their taxes and don't make excuses not to pay the taxes like in Spain. And
No eres un pícaro.
no, I try not to. So yeah, I think that side was already in me, and being in this country made me even more aligned with those values. And also, like, now, for example, when I'm in Spain, I find it really annoying when I'm in a restaurant and because everyone is speaking very loudly, the acoustics are horrible, and you cannot talk to the person in front of you. So I actually appreciate how in other cultures we don't need to speak that loud, and we can keep it low, and I think it's much better.
It's something that I still have troubles here in Spain. I mean, I love Spain. That's why I'm here. But sometimes, like, I go work out outside, where the rings are and the bars, and I always have my headphones in. But then there will be a person, and he'll play his music. Then another group of people will come, and they'll play their music. Then another group of people, and they're all just like, it's like just a conglomerate of music. And I noticed this at the street parties as well. Like, they'll set up 3 stages really close to each other, and you can hear all 3 stages going on at the same time.
In the verbenas, no, in the street parties.
Yeah. Well, here, just to be specific, so the audience knows, you're from Valencia, which also has its specific culture in Spain. I think one of the things that stands out to me are petardos, which are firecrackers. How do you feel about petardos? Do you miss them or not?
I used to love them as a kid. Like, I was throwing or firing petardos all the time, but not anymore. Like, they really scare me. Like, because you don't expect them, and you can do them, especially during Fallas, is the festival in Valencia in March. During a whole week, people are firing petardos all the time, unexpectedly, and and also throughout the year we use petardos when there's a wedding, a baptism, first communion celebration. I actually have an anecdote, because in Spain, like 3 or 4 years ago, I was in a cafe where there were many tourists and digital nomads working with their laptop in Valencia, and I think there was a first communion celebration, and when the kid celebrating his first communion or her first communion leaves the door, they throw this. It's called traca. It's like a line of many firecrackers, and it's like it only takes 10 seconds to explode, but they're like maybe 30 firecrackers at the same time. So all these people didn't know what was going on, because it was July or June, something like that, during summer, and they thought there was like some sort of terrorist attack or something like that, because it that sounds like, you know, like a gun or even like a little bombs. And they were all really scared, saying, what's going on? And I explained to them, it's fine, it's normal. We use firecrackers throughout the year to celebrate things. Yeah.
It's a little bit sketchy for people with PTSD, I think. You know, people have trauma from the war, and then the firecrackers are just going off. Because in Canada, nowadays, they talk about that a little bit during Halloween. And it's not nearly at the same extent as here in Valencia during the festivals.
Yeah. In Valencia now, people are talking about, you know, the need to regulate more the use of it, because of people with, for example, with autism, or even for pets as well. Many dogs get really, really scared. Babies, I mean, because they're quite powerful sometimes.
Another thing too with these festivals is like when we're talking about, mention the Fallas in Valencia, which is, I highly recommend people go to look at the Fallas. They're incredible. But I didn't stay for the burning because, one, I just didn't want to be surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people on the street while I can't breathe from all the smoke. And two, like, I respect the culture, and I think it's a cool tradition in the sense that it brings people together. But I think we have to be progressive about it, in my opinion, because I think we know enough now about pollution and climate change that we shouldn't be burning plastics. And it used to be at least just wood. Now, when you look at the Fallas, there's a shit ton of chemical stuff in there. But I was wondering what your perspective was, because, well, I know you a little bit from your podcast, of course, and I know that you're someone that's concerned about climate change and environmental issues, just like I am. What do you think about the Fallas? Do you think the tradition should just stay as it is, or do you think there's maybe a way to adjust it to make it a little bit healthier?
Yeah, I'm sure, and I think over the last few years, some of the artists are trying to become more sustainable and use different materials. Because basically they are spending the whole year putting together these huge monuments, and then these monuments are exposed for 5 days, and then the last day they are burned out on the streets, and there are like hundreds of them in the city. So obviously it's not very sustainable friendly, this burning. But it is true that I don't know, like, the percentage of pollution that is created compared to other things that we could do on a daily basis, So I don't want to be hypocritical about it either. Like, I'm a vegan, so obviously that's very good for the environment because I don't need meat or fish. But I don't want to give up, for example, my flights to Spain, and I fly to Spain very often. So I think it's important in all the areas of life to look how we can improve our carbon footprint and all that. But at the same time, it would be very difficult to have Fallas without burning these monuments.
Yeah,
Definitely. So I'm sure they will come up with more sustainable material to do that.
I agree. And of course, I'm asking you this so that the audience members know, and I do encourage that everyone who wants to learn Spanish to listen to your show and kind of have an idea about the things you think about and the things you talk about, because I kind of know some of your answers, because this is kind of one of those situations where I think I know you, but it's kind of in the same way that people know their favorite celebrity or public figure, right? I know the version of yourself that you put out there, that you put on your podcast, and you mentioned that on your podcast, where you'll present something that might be controversial, but you present it in, I think, a very objective way. I know that you've been called a TERF, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I've been called many different things, like right wing, left wing, TERF.
I think that's what happens when
lobbyist.
You're objective nowadays.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, but that's the thing. You realize that it doesn't matter what you say; it's about other people's interpretations of what you are saying. Every time I talk about something controversial, I always have an opinion, and I sometimes share my opinion, and I say, and this is my opinion. But before that, I normally tend to share the both sides of the discussion. Because it's also interesting for me to know, okay, why are there some people against this, or they're fighting for this? So I want to see, I want to understand it. Like, actually doing the podcast, the main purpose is, of course, to teach Spanish and to make people who are learning Spanish realize that you can talk about complex topics in a simple way. But the secondary reason is that to find out, is like a very selfish reason, to find out or discover what is going on in the world. And when I want, actually, all the episodes, most of the episodes are questions that I ask myself. Why is this happening? I want to find out. I want to know more about this, and then I do the research.
That's one of the reasons your podcast is my favorite for learning Spanish, is because I find a lot of the time when I'm studying Spanish, especially in a more traditional sense, with some of the traditional books, the topics are either outdated, they don't really relate to me, and then everything you talk about is just so relatable, so it's so much easier to follow. Now on this topic of you kind of getting all the being called left wing, right wing, a turf, whatever it is, and you are a very objective person. Has it been difficult for you? Like, has it dissuade you at all, or does it kind of motivate you to even get more out there?
Like I receive 99% of the comments are really positive.
Okay.
Only 1% is negative. Like today I received a negative comment on YouTube. Someone said that I'm going to go to hell, like the people who cheat on their partners and the thieves, because I'm gay. So he was like a fundamentalist. I don't pay attention, but I don't pay attention. I thank the person who say, oh, I really like your podcast, you are the best teacher, and I say thank you. But obviously I'm not the best teacher, I'm not the best podcast host, I'm not the best anything. But I appreciate that people who like the content that I create, they share it with me, and I'm very thankful and I really appreciate it. But in the same way, I don't take very seriously the positive feedback. I don't take very seriously the negative feedback either. I listen to both, and if I see that many people are complaining about something, I might do something about it. I would probably do, but it hasn't been the case. So it didn't really put me off to talk about like any specific topic. And as you said, the reason why I created that podcast in the first place was because I was learning French, and I discovered a very similar podcast called Inner French. And Hugo, its host and now my friend, a colleague of mine as well, he was talking about topics that were really interesting, and it was really easy to engage with them and binge listen to them. And I said, I want to do the same thing in Spanish, because I don't think there's anyone talking about these topics. Because when you are learning Spanish, it's good to know about the Spanish cuisine and the Spanish traditions and flamenco and all that, but it's also interesting to know how to talk about sex in Spanish, how to talk about trauma in Spanish, how to talk about inflation in Spanish, because there are topics that are important for all of us, no? And you don't see that in any book. Definitely.
Now, in relation to that, talking about the negative feedback, and then also talking about a little bit more of these controversial topics, there's a lot of research into how much negative feedback a culture will present, or how direct or blunt they are. For instance, Dutch people and people from Israel are very blunt. Some Asian cultures are usually not as direct with the negative feedback. England, kind of in the middle, but actually a little bit like they're also known to be not very direct, right? They kind of wrap around what they want to say. Me personally, no tengo pelos en la lengua, right? Like, I like people that are super straight up with me. I'm usually straight up. Gets me in trouble sometimes, but
is that common in Canada, or you are?
No, that's just that's okay. It's not even Belgium in me, because like Belgians aren't really like that either. I don't know. It's just the way I am. Okay. I guess. But I was wondering, from your experience, is there a difference between Spain and England in that? Do you feel like people are more upfront with negative feedback here in Spain than in England, or that they're more willing to get into a controversial discussion, or is it the opposite?
No, in Spain they are willing to talk about controversial. Yeah, I mean, the level of political correctness in the UK is much higher than in Spain. Yeah, definitely. Like I mean, literally, we do blackface in Spanish television in 2023, in one of the most watched shows in Spain. And yeah, of course, there's like more sensitivity towards some topics, but we are still very politically incorrect. Yeah. Definitely. And we don't avoid, we say, like people say in Spain, you shouldn't talk about religion, politics, or football in a party. Yeah. Because they are very controversial topics for Spaniards. But people do. And and when you want to complain,
more heated here about football than anything else.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
now,
complaining as well. If you want to complain in a restaurant, you are quite direct. You don't go round and round to say something. You're very direct.
and what about the whole political correctness thing? Do you feel like there's a lot? Of course, you're saying that people are more politically correct in England. Now, what about with this whole idea of wokeness and like kind of PC culture? Do you think it's something that people are a lot more concerned about in England as well than here? I mean, I have my own opinions about it. Like in a lot of things, I'm a pretty left-leaning guy. I'm always on the side of marginalized groups and everything. I want equality, but I kind of get tired of all the political correctness stuff. Just especially with cancel culture. Like I feel it used to be the right-wing people and the fascists that would burn books and control language. And now it's the ultra-left, which I don't actually consider left at all, and they're canceling people. And I feel like if you have the power to cancel people, you're not on the side of marginalized people. You're part of the hegemonic classes.
Yeah, that's a
You're
really
able
good
to
point,
do that.
actually. Yeah. I think the Anglo countries tend to lead on these trends, right? So I think in Spain and other European countries, this trend of political correctness and cancel culture is becoming to be a reality. But as I said before, we're still quite behind it. I think like as you know, because you talk to my you listen to my podcast, I talk about my sexuality, and I talk about my sexuality sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I talk about that because in Spain is a really good example of a country being absolutely backwards 30 years ago, because we had a dictator during the Frankism era, and then in 30 years becoming like a super modern, progressist country where LGBT rights are one of the best. The aceptación,
Accepted?
people being the level of accepting
Exception,
in the
yeah.
acception in people is really, really high. So it's a really good example of progress. So when I was a kid, I remember that you could make jokes about gays, lesbian, fat people, black people. All these people, it was completely fine to make jokes about, and the only representation in the media was like stereotypes, and people made a caricatura.
Caricature.
Yeah. So I'm glad that people now, when they see this in Spain, they say, no, this has been for all these years. We don't want this anymore because it's not fun. Like if you want to make a joke, the comedy has to be better than the level of offensa that you're going to make to that person. So I think it's good to have some red flags with some people, because some people, they still think they live in 1970 and we don't live in 1970 anymore. So I think it's good. And another question that I've been questioning myself lately is like when something is not debatable anymore. Like I think in the States, for example, racial segregation was in some states valid until the 70s or so. I'm not sure. You probably know better than me. Like at that point in history, probably people were still discussing, okay, no, actually there is a reason why we need to do this. No, but now no one who's normal, even if you are very far right, would discuss that racial segregation was positive or is positive, right? When some topics are gonna stop becoming a discussion, like, because I told you today, someone told me I'm going to go to hell because of my sexuality. Like when people are gonna stop saying that kind of shit, because it's like I don't take it seriously at all. But it's like when something like that is going to stop. I don't agree with cancel culture either. But obviously, if some people are openly homophobic or transphobic or racist, I won't support that person. Another thing is the interpretation of a group of people on Twitter that make someone transphobic or homophobic or racist, and I'm like, well, this might be a bit backwards, but I don't see it as a clear act of, hate.
Yeah.
So I think there is like a blur line, and but I don't agree generally with cancel culture either.
Yeah, I think it'll always be a bit of a challenge because those people are always going to exist, the extremists, on whatever side it is. And how we deal with them when it comes to canceling, when it comes to voicing them, I think it's such a difficult discussion to be had. But nowadays with technology, I think sometimes it's less about canceling these people and fixing the algorithms. Like, for instance, as I said, I'm usually kind of left-leaning, but I'll view a Jordan Peterson video once in a while because I want to get a little bit more of a right-wing perspective from someone who I find intelligent in some ways. And all of a sudden, the algorithm just starts feeding me nothing but right-wing rhetoric. And it doesn't do that with the left-leaning stuff. I don't know what that says about my algorithm, what it says about YouTube and things, but I think those are things that we have to focus on as well, even more so than just like canceling the one person that says something that offends someone.
Yeah, well, the algorithm is made not to show more right wing or left wing. It's made to show you something that is gonna trigger some emotion, and negative emotions are more triggering than positive emotions. Yeah. And if you are triggered by this emotion, you will stay scrolling for longer. Yeah. That's it. So it doesn't matter if you were really into, I don't know, puppies swimming in the pool, they will feed you with that. But normally, yeah, like someone who's gonna be very controversial and saying horrible things. Like I had for a month or so this guy, I think he's from Romania. He was detained like 2 months ago. Andrew Tate or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had him on my feed forever. It was like all the time. It was amazing. And then I realized as well that apparently he was asking his followers to reshare his content because he had been banned in different platforms. Crazy. But yeah,
I stayed out of that whole thing. I didn't, because I knew it would upset me. I saw one thing about Andrew Tate, and I was like, this guy's a complete douchebag. Like, I don't even want to learn more about this. Just keep me away.
Yeah, I feel bad for the young men who follow him because he's basically using them to be on his course to do cryptocurrency stuff. And he says things like, if you're underage, just grab your mom's card and use it to buy. So I mean, I feel really bad for them. For the people following him and all
now, just to bring this back into the Spanish language side of these things, because I think a lot of English speakers are very aware of what to say and what not to say because it's always on the news. But in Spanish, it's a little bit less talked about. Now, one of them is with chique, right? Like, instead of using feminine and masculine pronouns, you should use chique or something like that, right? So
yeah.
Chico, just for listeners who don't know, like chico, boy, chicos could refer to a group of boys and girls.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea to use things like chique and everything? Do you think this will help? Well, it's a very small percentage of people, but that percentage of people who feel non-binary?
Yeah, exactly. That's the use that we're giving it in Spain for the non-binary people. I think I said on my podcast that 2% of the people following my podcast are non-binary, on Spotify at least, because Spotify gives you that data. I only met non-binary people in London, and I always ask them about the pronouns, and they always told me, I don't mind. I know it's difficult to call they, them, so you can call me with my sex pronoun, him, her, or they. It's fine. So I've never felt like the actual non-binary people are that worried about people using their pronouns correctly, you know? In Spanish, you can also call someone using tú or usted, right? Usted shows more respect. And many people, when you call them by usted, they are like, no, please, don't call me by usted, call me by tú. So you are changing the pronouns Okay, these people is asking you, please change the pronouns, and we are fine with that. When I had to interview a nun in Spain, I used to call her before the interview, while we were arranging the interview, I used to call her Marta all the time. Marta
that's
this,
a
Marta
great,
that.
a great episode.
Yeah, so I call her Marta all the time. And then someone told me, you cannot call her Marta, you have to say Sor Marta. Sor means sister in Latin, no? So I said, okay, if that's the way I have to address this person, I will use Sor. I don't mind. So I don't know why there's such big fuss about addressing someone with a different pronoun. I think they have to understand that it will take a while, that it is difficult to use a different pronoun. Like, it's difficult for me. In English, I'm swapping pronouns all the time. So I can say I talk to him and it's actually her. And it's not because they are non-binary, it's because I mix up the pronouns.
Yeah.
So it's even more difficult for me. So yeah, I think non-binary people are actually quite accommodating, at least in my experience. For the rest of the population, in Spanish, I'm talking about, in the same way we change pronouns to tú, usted, or use don, doña, sor, padre, we can also address a non-binary person with a different pronoun. I don't think it's that difficult, to be honest.
Yeah. And what about this offensive word? Like one that I always use, because I consider myself one in a little bit, is peraflauta.
Peraflauta.
How bad is it to actually use? Because I'll use it to refer to myself. I mean, I own like 2 pairs of pants. Most of my shirts have rips in them. Luckily, you can't see the bottom of my clothes on the podcast. I bike everywhere. Like I'm kind of against car usage. If I'm sad, I put my feet in the soil. I'll be like, I'm a peraflauta. But then, like, I also hate on freeloaders and like hippies that just do shit all. And I'll be like, oh, that guy's a peraflauta. Right? And how bad is this for me to say?
That's interesting that you refer yourself as a perroflauta. I would call you more like a guiri/hippie in Spanish, like the hippie that we have in Spain. Well, I think there's like now this tendency of reclaiming the word. So I'm sure many perroflautas. I don't know if you have explained previously what a perroflauta is.
Oh, it's kind of, hippie. Right?
Yeah,
hippie. I haven't explained it on the show before. But.
Yeah, left-wing hippie. I think there's now this trend to reclaim all these words. So, fat people, for example, gordo, gorda, is a word that we try to avoid when we refer to someone who's fat. And they're calling themselves, soy gordo, soy gorda. Mm-hmm. The word for faggot in Spanish is marica or maricón. It's a word that over the last 10 years has been reclaimed by the gay community. The same word, the same for lesbian, the same for rojo, which means left wing. Rojo.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and even facha, which means fascist, but it's like more like right wing, not a real fascist.
That must be confusing for Americans, who like a rojo, right wing, so then here a rojo, left wing.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. So I think, I mean, we're used to swear a lot, so I don't think it's that bad.
Yeah.
I don't think it's bad at all. Like, especially in Valencia, where in Valencia we call our friends son of a bitch all the time. Like, you son of a bitch, I love you so much. So it's like,
yeah.
We've got a very dirty tongue, as we say in Spanish. La lengua muy sucia.
I'm comfortable with it. Now, just since we're talking about language, and we're both language teachers as well, I encourage everyone to check out your YouTube channel as well. We've got a lot of language tips there. Of course, you have your Spanish learning course. I'm going to put links to all of this in the description. But just to give some people hints right now on the show, what are some of your favorite study methods? Okay.
Not only as a Spanish teacher, but also as a Spanish, as a language learner, language student, and now I'm taking back my French. I'm learning again. I think it's so important listening, and it's not because I have a podcast, but the importance of listening is sometimes undervalued. Like when people said to me, "Oh, César, I listened to your 120 episodes twice, and I feel like my Spanish is so much better. My ability to understand is so much better. My vocabulary is much wider now." I was like, "Okay, thank you." But I was like, "Well, I mean, it might have helped, but not that much." But then I did the same thing with the French podcast. I re-listened all the episodes, and then I started with a teacher, and I hadn't really spoken French for 3 years, and I was really surprised with how well I could get by in French. Like, I was making still many mistakes, grammar, preposition, blah blah blah, but all these words that I didn't know I knew, they were just coming up. And I was like, he was asking me, how have you learned this expression, or this, this specific structure is quite complicated. And I was like, well, because the host of this podcast, he's saying the same thing in every episode, so I just recall it. So I think the importance of comprehensive input is really important. And obviously, the more you work on that input, the better. So if just like you get that input, you listen to it once, that's fine. If you can listen to it twice, it's even better. If you can work on the transcript, if you can get the words that you don't know, put them on flashcards and relearn them, it's even better. If you can analyze the tenses and see, okay, why is he using the imperfect here and not the indefinite or whatever, it's even better. So basically, the more, the merrier, you say?
Yeah.
No? Yeah. Cuanto más azúcar, más dulce. Clearly. And also there is like a trend of people saying, oh, grammar is not that important. Well, if you just want to get by and you want to be fluent, you can be fluent making many mistakes and people will understand what you're saying. You might have some misunderstandings, but I've seen people who are really, really fluent in Spanish and make tons of mistakes. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you want to have a level of fluency and also a level of accuracy, right? You want to balance that, because I saw the opposite case as well. People using a very proper Spanish, but not having the ability to speak because they are very afraid of making mistakes, and it takes them 2 minutes to answer a question. So you have to weigh up the things that you're learning, the things that you are putting into practice, putting in on the balance, the level of passive learning that you're receiving, and also the active learning, the way you are producing the language. People normally forget, because we don't write anymore. It's very important, and if you can do it by hand, it's even better, because you will retain the things better. Analyze what you're doing. I think it's very important. And
now, talking about retention, there's the three most rigorously studied study methods. The three most rigorously study methods. Yeah, okay, I said that right. I'm going to bring them up, and I'm just wondering if you've had any experience with it, and if you've noticed if it helps with your students or with yourself. Now, the one is the generation effect. And this is when you take a test before you know the material, because now they're actually finding out that test taking isn't the best way to evaluate. If you take a test beforehand, it's actually a really good study method, right? Because if you don't know the answer before, but you're trying to figure out, you're priming your neurology to learn it. And this also relates to the hypercorrection effect, which I think is the most important when it comes to languages. The hypercorrection effect is when you make a mistake and then you're embarrassed about it. So then you learn it afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's super important when you're learning languages to start speaking it right away, even if you're going to make mistakes, because that embarrassment is going to help you to remember it better. What do you think about that one?
Well, I think the first one is very interesting because it will develop your instinct. Your instincts. Sorry, because that's another very important thing about learning anything, right? You have to trust yourself and your intuition. and say, okay, I don't know why, but I think this might be, or I might have heard this extraction. So I think it's really important. So I've never heard of this theory, but I find it really interesting. And the second one, I think with mistakes, that's the thing, right? In the same way, you cannot learn how to play piano without making any mistake. You have to accept that mistakes are gonna come, and you have to, because I've seen people who are actually very confident, who struggle to learn a new language because they're not used to be vulnerable. And when you learn a new language, you know that you live in Spain, that you have to be vulnerable and you're gonna make many mistakes. And we say, well, people normally are quite nice, but some people, they might laugh, but not in a bad way, but they might say, oh no, this is not like that, you've made a mistake. So you have to accept that some awkward situations are going to happen. And obviously, in these situations where the mistakes are really awkward, I'm sure it's easier to remember, to get that memory, burned in your brain. Like I can recall when I made mistakes, like using the word molestar in Spanish means to annoy, but I use it to molest.
Don't molest
when I want
me.
to say to annoy. I said something like my dad was molesting me or something like that. So it's not great, but I remember because someone told to me, no, this is not what you're trying to say. And the same with the to get late, the phrasal verb.
Oh yeah.
I thought that to get late was to lay down. So I was basically saying all the time, oh, I'm so tired, I can't wait to get home and get laid. Or I'm gonna go to bed very soon, I need to get laid. And then someone said to me, awesome. So yeah, those mistakes are actually really good because you see the expression on people's face and you're like, okay, I made a big mistake now.
False cognizance, right? They're I love them with language learning.
Do you have any example of those in Spanish?
Well, the same ones, because like molestar, right? Molest, it's the same false friend, so you can make the same mistake from in English. I can't think of any of the top of my head right now, but I've made so many, as you know, from like my errores de un guiri. I'll try and remember to put a link in the page for this as well. And there, I have a shit ton of mistakes there. Now another one, spaced repetition. And the reason I want to bring this one up is because they actually did a study for Spanish learning. So group 1 studied for 8 hours for 1 day. Then group 2 studied for 4 hours 1 day. And then a month later studied for another 4 hours. And then 8 years later, I don't know how they got the funding for this test, but 8 years later, they got these groups back. And the group 2 that studied 4 hours 1 day and then a month later another 4 hours did 200% better than the group that studied 8 hours in 1 day.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all.
So I'm wondering, in your course, because of course I'm familiar with your podcast. I haven't taken the course yet. I'm waiting for the advanced one to come out.
Yeah, you are too advanced for the intermediate course. It will be too boring for you.
Maybe, I don't know. I listen to your intermediate course all the time, so like, or intermediate podcast, and I'm still learning things all the time. So,
okay.
But is there a way to utilize spaced repetition in your course?
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm a very big fan of this, especially for vocabulary. With my podcast, I always give away the flashcards that I create with an image, because it's also when we learn a new word, it's important to use the spaced repetition in order to memorize it and retain that word properly, but also like put it in context. I give the context, is what you've heard on the podcast before. But I also recommend, if you're creating your own flashcards, to connect it with an emotion, with a personal memory, because that will be, or even using mnemotechnics, and an image as well. On the course, or also when I was doing one-to-one lessons, repetition and reviewing what you've seen in the past is essential, right? Like if we see the pronouns today and you won't see the pronouns until in a phrase in 3 weeks, you will remember how pronouns are used. So obviously you need to review and see. That's why on my course, on my intermediate course, the level of difficulty progress throughout the course because we start to use all the things that we had seen before. No?
Yeah.
But yeah, spaced repetition, especially for vocabulary, is key. It's really important, and it does work.
Perfect. Another reason to check out your course. Now then, another one, we kind of talked about this already. It's interleaving, and that's instead of just studying one type of thing and doing it over and over and over again, you should mix it, right? And I mean, they talk a lot about this nowadays. That even just on a societal level, if you want to progress in your career, like you, I find you a very successful person. I mean,
thank you.
You do very well. I mean, you've got over 1 million listens on your podcast.
Well, actually, 3.
3 now. Okay. Well, I started listening 2 years ago. It was over 1 million. So now over 3. How many people do you have on Instagram now? It's like 17,000. Or...
Yeah, but you know what? Instagram. I hate Instagram now. I don't even have the app on my phone. We can talk about Instagram and language learning because I think it's very interesting. I want to know your view on that.
Okay, yeah, I got a story. I hate Instagram too, man. I'm I use it because I want to get myself out there, but the algorithm's not working for me. It gets me depressed because I put a shit ton of work into trying getting things out there. No one switches over to my actual site, how I can make money and actually keep it going. So that's the one thing. Just on my personal business side, Instagram hasn't been working. It gets me kind of depressed because I'm not getting enough out there. Personally, I'm switching now to Substack for my writing, and the community there is so much stronger, and they don't have the same type of algorithm, I find. Like, people find you, and it's so much easier for me to find people that I like. And then the other thing, just bringing up Instagram for language learning, when I started my Errores de un Guiri account, I also made sure to only follow language learning accounts. And at first it was really good. I was learning quite a bit because I would scroll through and it would be nothing but informational videos, sometimes something funny, but it was always something educational for me. Then I spent one day looking at surf videos, and I'm human, right? If I see a couple of letters or I see a surf video, my eyes go to the surf video. I brought this up on another podcast too. And now I don't get any more educational content. All I get is just like this immediate, visually stimulating material, and yeah, Instagram just sucks now, and I'm just left feeling empty. I've wasted my time. So yeah, that's my view. Yeah,
I think you've got the experience as well as a consumer and also as a creator, right? As a consumer, I hate the way we drag ourselves in a infinite scrolling period, and at the end of the day you see your statistics and you spend 90 minutes on Instagram and you could have been doing something much more not productive but just more meaningful. You can just talk to a friend. Okay, it doesn't need to be productive. And as a creator, when I first started on Instagram, the trend was creating carousels with 10 different images, and it was very interesting because you could tell a story, you could explain a complex grammar, structure, whatever. You had the time, and people would invest more than 30 seconds reading a post, They could spend maybe a couple of minutes and then make a comment to practice what they've learned. And it was still like a very subtle learning because no one is gonna, unless they grab a notebook and they take note of what you're saying, but it's just like a little random and daily lesson in Spanish. But now, with not only Instagram but all the platforms, even YouTube, pushing the very short content and mixing it up, as you said, because now before on Instagram you only saw on your feed the things you were following, but now they're pushing, even if you're not following them, other accounts that they know they're gonna do well on your feed. So language teachers, I feel we have started to, instead of creating content for students, we are creating content for the algorithm. Okay, so we're not thinking what's the best content I can create for a Spanish student. We're thinking what's the best content for the algorithm to show to this student. And we create things that are actually that they're actually clashing our values as a teachers with the thing that we do. Like we say to the students, don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's a normal part of the journey. And then we make tons of videos saying, don't make this mistake.
Yeah.
With a stop emoji. Fears, scaremonger. Yeah. Scaremonger. So I think there's a lot of contradiction in this type of content. So over the last year or even longer than that, I only use Instagram to promote my episodes. I don't do anything else. If you can see, you can go to my feed. I just say, go to this episode if you want to learn, because I only create long content.
Mm-hmm.
On YouTube, my YouTube channel is not doing very well, and I'm on a second phase when I'm investing money and I'm working with other people to make it more professional. But it takes time. But I don't mind, because I'm creating content that I actually believe in. Content that is long, that I want someone to be with an attention span of at least 5 minutes to see something in Spanish, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For me, it's refreshing to hear that from you, because, well, you're at the level where I want to be, you know? I feel like if I had the amount of, like, I don't give a shit about numbers of followers. Like, that's not what's important to me. But what's important is just the amount of interaction, right?
Yeah.
And when I see the amount of comments you get on your YouTube videos as well, and Instagram and everything, I'm like, I would love that, because I want to have this sense of community. And then sometimes I think, all these negative things that I say about social media, is this just because I'm sad that not enough people are interacting with me? Mm-hmm. But now that I hear your perspective, it's like, you know what, even once you get to a higher level and you really start to get success with the content you're creating like you do, it seems that it still plays a role in mental health and everything.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Thank you for that. It's good to know.
I mean, it takes time as well. Like, it took me over a year, no, more than a year, to reach the first million, but then it's more exponential. But it takes time. Yeah. That's the thing. You have to be very consistent, and it's not about the number of comments or the number of followers. It's more about the value that you provide to the people who use your content or feel that you are helping them, right?
Yeah, like, definitely.
That's how I feel with the people I follow.
I'll tell you more about it after we're done the show, but for the listeners who are interested in all this as well, so my website used to be on ghost.org, and I chose Ghost because they're nonprofit, they're carbon neutral, they're open source. That really attracted to me. They have a lot of, they help you a lot throughout the process. And then now I recently switched over to Substack, and it's amazing. In 1 week, I've gotten more interactions, more paid followers, more followers in general in 1 week than I have in 6 months on Ghost. And that includes paying for Google advertisements. That includes paying for advertisements on Instagram and on Substack. It's all been free. Well, I've spent a lot of time interacting with other writers, but that's the whole thing. Now they have this, they just released it a few days ago, and it's Notes. And Notes looks like Twitter, kind of looks like Instagram, but you're not limited. I don't think you're limited on how much you can write. And I've just noticed that the types of interactions are so much more authentic, and people start interacting more with the long form stuff. Like you post something, the way that we all want to post something short is to attract people to the long form actual educational content. Yeah. And I've noticed that on Substack, it's been working that's been absolutely incredible. So I don't know, maybe something for you to think about.
That's really good.
About it, and the listeners as well. So at the end of the episode, I always say check out www.bornwithoutborders.fyi, but I'm switching over to I'll say no, without borders.fyi. Now it's bornwithoutborders.substack.com. So check it out there if you want to support this show. But now it says it went on a little bit of a tangent there. We're almost coming up on an hour. Is there any final words you want to mention to the listeners or anything?
Not really. I just want to thank you. I can't believe it's been almost an hour. Thank you very much for this chat. I want to say, if someone's learning Spanish, obviously they can use all my free resources, and I will be happy to hear their feedback, positive or negative. I will take it with a pinch of salt in both cases, because you have to trust your instincts as well. For example, I want to say something. I've been living in this country for a few years now, and during this interview, every time I do an interview in English, I always feel like part of me is thinking, oh, I just made a mistake, or I didn't explain this properly. I should speak better English. So I just want to say that, because I feel like many people might feel that these insecurities or this lack of confidence when learning a language is not normal, or not everyone feel it. It's absolutely normal. It might not go away ever. You have to live with it, but that shouldn't prevent you from being on a podcast, as you did on my podcast, as I'm doing now on your podcast, or as someone listening to this podcast now is, should also get out and speak their language they're learning. And I just wanted to give that message.
Definitely. Well, César, thank you so much for coming on the show. It means the world to me. And
thank you,
listeners, remember to check out all the links in the description, especially if you're interested in learning languages or learning Spanish specifically. And there will be a new episode every Tuesday.